Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the DMV Daily Radio Show. I'm your host, Hassan Giordano, a.k.a. Mr. Politics, back in the building. And I'm all by myself on set today, as both of my co-hosts have abandoned me for higher paying gigs, I guess. So I'll be joined by a friend of the program. He's here with me to keep me some company, along with our dedicated and faithful producer. Jason's in the house, of course. And, of course, you, the viewers and listeners, as we discuss one of the most contentious pieces of legislation pending in Annapolis, at least as it relates to the future of Baltimore City. But before we get into that program, as always, got to let you know, this program is brought to you by our fine sponsors, such as that stellar legal team known as the Bates & Garcia Law Firm, specializing in criminal defense, real estate, and bodily injury cases. Bates & Garcia is Maryland's legal dream team. So make sure you contact them today for your free consultation. 410-814-4600 is the number. Make sure that you tell them that DMV Daily referred you. They'll give you the special homeboy discount. It's also brought to you by those savvy political strategists over there, Political Strategic Solutions, who have mastered the art of political communications and successfully gotten people elected to office since the 1970s, once led by a man by the name of Art Murphy. If you're thinking about running for office in 2020, like some of their clients, like Philip Westry, who raised all of that money in this past election following, make sure you give them a call today. They'll help you do some fundraising. They'll design your website for you, get you social media sites integrated into your website. They'll get you a campaign plan, videos, and so much more. Make sure you reach out to them today. 240-242-7505 is the number. Reach out on the web at www.politicomsolutions.com. And of course, Together We Rise is not just a slogan, but rather a blueprint for the future of the union movement. Make sure you join the fight for 15 and other progressive pieces of legislation being advocated by the nation's #1 union, SEIU 500. Join the fight at www.seiu500.org. Now, you can check out DMV Daily Media on the Larry Young Morning Show every Tuesday morning from 7:15 to 7:30 a.m. on WLB 1010 a.m. as I break down the Annapolis report during this 90-day legislative session. Or you can just listen to the Annapolis report in its entirety right here on DMVDaily.news. It's released every Monday, or between now and the end of the legislative session, which will end in April. Or you can check out the hottest legal podcast of 2019, Law and Disorder with Ivan Bates, which premieres every other Tuesday, with the first episode receiving amazing numbers since its inception just last week. Go to DMVDaily.news, check them out, check all the articles out that we have there. And of course, you can watch the live stream or you can watch the live stream program each night, or you can listen to programs 24/7 right there on DMVDaily.news. And we're always looking for talented citizen journalists to join the DMV Daily News family. So make sure that you go sign up on the website today to become a citizen journalist. We need people who can write articles and op-eds. Doesn't have to be about politics. That's what I do. But it doesn't have to be about politics. It can be about anything you please. Sports, politics, news, art, entertainment, whatever the case may be. We definitely want a diversity when it comes to the journalists and the reporting over there at DMV Daily, because DMV Daily is just that. It's not just for Baltimore. It's Delaware, D.C., Maryland, Virginia. That's the DMV. So we want everybody to be involved, and we want all news to be reported on. We still got to get into a conversation about what's going on down there in Virginia. They off the chains down there, man. And nobody still has resigned. Nobody still has been impeached. And we're just going to keep going. I think it's so much now that it's so much that the voters are like, well, what the hell? Just keep all the goddamn bums in there till the next election. Because when you try to get rid of one, the other one's going to point the finger at the other one, so on and so forth. So just thank God it's not Maryland.
And pull some of his skeletons out of their closets.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, make sure that you go online today while you're listening to the show. Just scoot on over to your phone or to your PC or to your laptop, the one you're not using to watch or listen to the show. go to paypal.me/DMV Daily News. Donate whatever you can today. This is a public service announcement for DMV Daily. We are citizen journalists. We don't get paid to do what we do. We just love to do what we do. And so make sure you go there today. Donate $1, donate $100. Hell, donate $1 million, especially if you're Bloomberg. Don't you want this Johns Hopkins thing? You should want citizen journalism even more. So we know you're listening today. So make sure up in your ivory towers at New York, you go to DMV Daily News and donate right there online. PayPal.me/DMV Daily News. And of course, as always, you can find all of our shows aired 24/7, not only on the website, where you can check out our podcast as well, but you can also listen to all of them on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, and Google Play, or watch every episode of the DMV Daily Radio Show on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Periscope at DMV Daily News. Make sure you go subscribe to our YouTube page. We're close to a mark and a milestone that we need to get to, and then like us on our Facebook page. And don't forget, we are currently in the process of putting together our first live stream town hall on Monday, February 18th. That's this Monday. Yeah, you're off. It's President's Day. 5 to 8 p.m. Union Baptist Church. Beat us there. Don't meet us there. 1219 Drew Hill Avenue. It's our President's Day Public Safety Forum, as we invited the community to join local stakeholders for a live stream broadcast to discuss the issues facing our communities, especially that of public safety and the reform of the criminal justice system. So you definitely don't want to miss it. Tara Huffman Andrews from OSI will be a part of it. Sergeant Clyde Boatwright from the FOP, from the city school police, will be there. Nicole Mundell, Alfred Justice, Karen York from Job Opportunities Task Force, Councilman Zeke Cohen, Chair of the Education Committee, Councilman Brandon Scott, Chair of the Public Safety Committee, a special invited guest, the newly appointed Commissioner of the City of Police Commissioner of the City of Baltimore, Michael Harrison. You'll have a lot of people there, stakeholders, elected leaders, but we want to listen to the people. We want to make sure that we come together. We want to talk about the micro policing. You heard Joseph Kane on here talking about it prior when he was on here a few weeks back. And, Tara Andrews and Huffman, I'm sorry, got married. I keep calling her legend. We go way back, but, they're doing some good stuff over there with OSI around that micro policing as well. So we're going to have a lot of conversation and dialogue on President's Day right down there, Union Baptist Church, 1219 Drew Hill Avenue. But if you can't make it for whatever reason, of course, you can watch it right here on DMVDaily.news. We'll be live streaming it to our Facebook page, YouTube, and Periscope as usual, and on our website. So make sure you go check that out. And tonight, after the show, we're going to be broadcasting live. The Black Wall Street Awards are going to be held right here at DMV Daily Studios. 2421 Maryland Avenue is the address, as our main man, Donnie Glover, comes over from West Baltimore, comes all the way over here to East Baltimore, like it's such a big journey, to present deserving recipients of their flowers before they die. Come join us live tonight, 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., right here at 2421 Maryland Avenue for the Black Wall Street Awards. Now, if you want to join in today's conversation, as always, you can call in or text in your questions or comments to the studio phone line. 410-819-2370 is that number. And if you're watching on Facebook, like so many people are, I see Kaylin, Bobby Moore, Keith Scott. Make sure you leave your comment or your question right there if you don't want to give us a call, and we definitely will check that out. Now, I know people have been badgering me to talk about this subject, and really I've been wanting to talk about it, but trying to get all the players involved, both the opposition and those in favor of it, from trying to get Johns Hopkins involved, trying to get the legislators who are either opposed to it, on the fence, or in favor of it involved. It was just too much. I said, so you know what? We're going to roll with my main man, because he knows what he's doing. Matter of fact, he just released a statement on it earlier today. It was today, wasn't it? Yeah. And so I said, you know what? We're going to roll with it. Gave out the invitation to the legislators. Of course, they are in the middle of session. Some of them, they reached back out and said, look, Hassan, we're in the middle of hearings. I'm not going to be able to break away from the hearings. That, they don't want another Joan Carter Conway, Barbara Robinson moment. Fox 45 catch him running over here talking to us. But nonetheless, We're going to talk about Senate Bill 793, House Bill 1094, sponsored by Senator Antonio Hayes and Delegate Cheryl Glenn, entitled the Community Safety and Strengthening Act. Who it strengthens or who it keeps safe is anyone's guess, but that's the name of the bill. It's a bill that will allow for Johns Hopkins University to have armed guards on and around their campus, something many community members and elected leaders are opposed to, including our guest today, our main man, Mr. Shane Bryan. What's happening, Captain?
Hey, man, what's going on?
Oh, man, nothing much.
The sun's out. It's a good day. It's a
Hump
good day.
day?
Made it halfway through the week.
Yeah, we almost there, and then tomorrow is Valentine's Day.
That's true.
And I can't be here. I'm telling y'all, it's probably going to be Ivan by himself because my baby, she don't play that. Valentine's Day. Thursday is already our day anyway. It's supposed to be, no matter how busy we get Mondays and Thursdays. But I've been on the show every damn night, so that doesn't really fair to when I get home, I'm going straight to sleep.
You got to balance it, man.
Yeah, I know. So guess what? I'll be right there at home tomorrow. We got to go out, take out for dinner, the good old stuff.
There you go.
Yeah, gotta make it happen, So
Special
you won't see
night.
me tomorrow. I'm holding it down tonight. They can hold it down tomorrow night. But as we're here today, we're going to discuss this bill. It includes millions of dollars for Baltimore City in years to come, including a law enforcement cadet apprenticeship program, so much more. You've read the bill, 21-page bill. Tell the people who are watching what's contained in this bill. I know I looked it over and I'm not really pleased with a lot of this stuff. But you made a statement about it today that I read over. What's your take on this thing?
Yeah, so there's three main components of the bill, to which each could be its own bill and deserving of their own democratic debates. One major component is the funding that would go to anchor institutions here in Baltimore, along with some funds for youth programs. Another component is that cadet training program that a lot of folks have been talking about, the program that Coppin's really interested in starting and hosting out there to help better train officers for Baltimore City. And the third component of the bill, rather, is that Hopkins police bill, giving Hopkins the authority to create its own police department independent of any state agency. I think that across the board, there's some concerns that a lot of folks in the community have around, why they stack in the bill the way that they are, trying to push it through, trying to, name it something that's attractive to the community, especially in the General Assembly with so much focus going on crime and safety here in Baltimore City. The starting with just the funding components, there's $10 million on an annual basis with no sunset date to give to anchor institutions, being pretty much hospitals and institutions of higher education, to be used for, they say, blighted areas. So you think about the area around University of Maryland, the area around Hopkins that they're redeveloping, tearing down places and building back up different communities. Along with that, there's some funds going to the youth fund here in Baltimore and the Youth Works program, which is great. However, it's only for 4 years. So
that does have a sunset.
That has a sunset. It's a much smaller amount. I think we got 3.5 for the youth fund and $1 million for the Youth Works program.
And this is the state have to pay this, right?
That's correct. So it would be state funds, state monies that would be coming in
separate
to work with those
from
programs.
Other allocations that the governor may have already been given to the city.
That's how I understand it. Yeah, and the certainly for the youth programs, the youth fund, and for Youth Works, that money would trickle down into communities, and for community-based organizations as well. The funds around the anchor institutions, that $10 million is an astronomical. It's a lot of money. I'm not quite sure the thought process behind that, or where that came from, or what that those funds would be used for. So I'd be really interested to hear more from the legislators or folks who put that in about the reasoning behind that.
And the funny thing is, when I talk to legislators about this that aren't from Baltimore City, I think one or two might have been, there's a big group of us. They were like, $10 million. Oh, that's cool. Well, that's good for Hopkins. They're putting up that type of money. It was like, nah, bro, that ain't Hopkins. Right. That's Maryland that has to give that up. And they immediately, and these are Democrats. I think it was one Republican in there. It's like, oh, hell no. Why would we pay the bill for this? Doesn't Hopkins want this? Why aren't they paying this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like I said, I don't understand the reasoning or why that was added into this bill, especially because it's talking about blighted areas, and we're not talking about funds that are going directly to community or community organizations that's managed and has an oversight of community. So just want to hear more about that. I don't really understand. And it's not sunlight, it's not sunsetted. So it's continuous. Then it mandates the governor to pay that in the annual budget. The cadet program, that's something that really does sound like a good opportunity for the city to have another training option, to have it be placed at Coppin, to better train our officers and build up the force of Baltimore. It has some funds in there. I think it's $750,000 annually, along with some monies connected to how many cadets are going in and what forces they're coming from. So, that looks like a good opportunity and a good program to hopefully bring in more officers into the city force, but not necessarily just the city. Any of the state police or city municipal police departments could send their cadets through that program. I don't particularly have a problem with that. It looks like it's something that I know Coppin's been really pushing for with Chief Ham over there. So it could be a good opportunity. The Hopkins police bill is long. That's the majority of the text, and so it goes into pretty great detail around the different components of the bill. But generally speaking, for myself, I do oppose the giving those particular powers to Johns Hopkins, a private institution accountable to a board of trustees, not having state oversight for the powers of policing, which we know can be pretty powerful and controversial at times. So that is where my opposition lies with that particular component of the bill. I think there are certainly opportunities for us to find compromise. Even Hopkins, when they released their report probably a month or so ago, one of their options was to have a special force or a special district with the Baltimore City Police Department that would encompass their campuses and allow for officers to be specially trained on how to work and be on college campuses. So they acknowledge that that's an opportunity, and I think that's something we should explore rather than creating another separate department in Baltimore City that already has a lot of different policing entities to keep it all underneath one house, especially as we're looking to rebuild that department here in the city with city oversight and community input.
Well, but they would argue that they would be overseen by not only just the Baltimore Civilian Review Board, but also this 15-member accountability board that they're putting together with student, staff, and faculty. But yet Hopkins gets to appoint everybody on the board other than the two members that the mayor gets one, Council President Jack Young gets the other. So 13 members come from Hopkins and 2 members come from the city. I mean, that's, I don't know if that jives really well, but they're saying that this is their accountability board. This will keep them honest. Do you kind of look at it from the same perspective?
I mean, you could still do that. You could still have an accountability board and have a special district that would fall underneath the Baltimore City Police Department. There wouldn't be anything stopping Hopkins from doing that with the special district. As we know with the Civilian Review Board, there's no teeth in that particular board. And so even when we find misconduct that has taken place, it goes to the internal review board on how to handle those mishaps. So it would be the same for Hopkins, and if I'm understanding correctly, it would be 3 individuals who have law enforcement experience or law enforcement background, and up to 2 civilians that would have non-law enforcement background. So it maintains that same regulation, regardless if it's going to fall underneath Baltimore City Police Department or their own independent police department. So at the end of the day, you can create as many boards and as many oversight committees and as many advisory boards as you want, but who is this department accountable to should something go wrong? And how would citizens have their grievances handled if mishaps do happen? So that's my concern.
So my question is, and Celeste Williams, she said this on here on the Facebook feed, and this is what I've gotten so much from the community, from members of SAP, the Students Against Private Policing, So let's say she hates the idea of Hopkins getting a police force to joke more people who don't care about our community carrying guns through the community. How has Hopkins been able to respond to, and this kind of came from SAP as well, we don't need more armed officers, we need less guns, per se. I mean, have they given a response or one that you fully feel or maybe the community feels is one that kind of is rational, that makes sense?
I mean, I agree that I don't think that necessarily more guns in any type of situation is going to create a safer environment, particularly for underrepresented minority students, faculty, staff, and visitors on the campus. Hopkins certainly has hosted a number of events since the introduction of the bill about this time last year, and has heard from not only the community, the students, faculty, and staff, but they've brought in experts from across the country to talk about policing. And excuse me, I think that even some of those panelists would say that policing, a police force or a police department is not going to solve the issue of crime on or surrounding the campus. And so at the end of the day, what is the goal? What is the purpose of Hopkins getting the department? Is it to protect the students? Is it to only stay on campus or be in the community? Is it, who are you policing against or for? So there's lots of questions. I think and I hope the legislators take a good amount of time to consider the ramifications of dueling out a private, rights of private policing to an organization. As we know here in Baltimore, there's lots of private institutions of higher education that at this point in time say they're not interested in having their own independent police department, but it would certainly open the door for those other institutions like Micah, like Loyola, Notre Dame, and others to explore getting their own department. And personally, I think we have way too many police departments in Baltimore City. We don't see adequate collaborations or coordination of different departments working to address the issue of crime and public safety. And I'm just nervous that if we add another one into the mix, we're going to further that disconnect between what's happened on the ground in various communities to what some folks are trying to protect, so to speak, with lots of wealth and privilege.
Absolutely, especially with Bloomberg behind. This is what gets me, right? Anytime you put a bill like this in combination with so many things, we see this happen with the lottery all the time. Oh, let's make it about the kids because nobody can vote against kids. So, of course, this is going to go to schools. So it's a great thing. You got to pass it, right? And I feel like that's almost what they're doing here. It's like, look at all this money that we're giving kids with the, Youth Works and the Youth Fund, and look at all this money that you get if you give us this. But not to mention, what I found very peculiar was when I went to research this for the Annapolis report just a few days ago, last week, a couple days ago, maybe last week. It was introduced in the Senate by Antonio Hayes, 40th District, and then Cheryl Glenn from the 45th. Both of them who said, mind you, we're introducing it, but we're not actually on board yet.
Right. Yeah.
But the Senate judicial proceedings was set to hear this next Friday, the 22nd, at 12 o'clock. The House Judiciary was set to hear it on the 26th at 1 o'clock. But now they've pushed it back to the exact same day that the Senate's holding their hearing 30 minutes before. So the House will be holding in the judiciary at 11:30 next Friday, while the Senate holds the exact same hearing on the exact same bill 30 minutes later across the street in the judicial proceedings. I've never seen that happen in my life in Annapolis, that the same bill on the same topic is in competing houses at the exact same time during a hearing.
Why would they do that?
To me,
I honestly don't know.
It's divide and conquer. So most times advocates will come down, like we just saw last week, House Economic Matters, and we had SEIU 1199
minimum wage.
Yeah, the minimum wage. Ricard was on the show last week, and so they had a very when you're an advocate and you have these advocates who are supporting, they bring busloads of people down, and they'll sit down there for hours upon hours testimony. It was like 175 people that signed up just in the House to testify in favor and or opposed to this bill. But what happens is if I'm Johns Hopkins and I know people are going to come out in droves against it, they can't be in two places at one time.
Oh, man.
So instead of 100 and some people going to the House to testify against my bill, I'm going to have it at the same time in the Senate. So only 50 people can go here. So it doesn't look as bad. And so I'm going to flood my people on both ends. I'm telling you, on the House Maryland General Assembly website, it was initially scheduled for 2/26, which is, I believe, Tuesday of the following week at 1 o'clock in the House. And then mysteriously, today I get an email from a legislator that says, oh, by the way, now they're both held on the same exact day, 30 minutes apart. And you know that that's basically matching up. You're not going to be done a bill like in this magnitude in 30 minutes.
Right.
So now people who may be like you or others who are against this bill will now have to say, do I, go to the House and oppose it, or do I go to the Senate and oppose? Because you're not going to be able to go crisscross both. It's going to be impossible,
Right.
unless it matches up just perfectly. But then you got to sign up for. It's a whole lot of shenanigans going on. So if it wasn't for the combination of all these things, that's raised the initial red flag. But now with this, that just told me right now they're just trying to push this through, and they're going to get it through by any means necessary.
Yeah.
So I feel sorry for y'all in that. If y'all really, really against it, y'all need to start emailing these legislators right now, and calling them right now, getting your written testimony together right now, and drop it off on both chambers. So they can't get away with the written. You can submit the written whether you're there present or not. So if that's what you're planning to do, whether you're for it or against it,
Right.
you better make sure you start now, because you're not going to have an opportunity to testify on both of these bills because they're happening simultaneously. And I've worked down Annapolis been back and forth down there since 2002. So that's 17 years. I have never in my life seen a bill both on the House and the Senate side the exact same time for a hearing. Never. Ever. But let's go to the lines. Got a couple people holding. Hey, Carla. Welcome to the DMV Daily Show.
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, how you doing? Hi, this is Keith Scott.
Hey, Keith.
I just want to ask a question. University of Maryland has a police force. What's the difference of University having one and Johns Hopkins trying to have one?
That's a great question. And Morgan and Coppin have one. They explained this to me earlier. Go ahead.
Yeah, that is a really good question. So those institutions are state-run institutions that are accountable to public officials. And that's my main concern is when we give public goods away and to private institutions that aren't accountable to the public. It's a slippery slope for us to go down. So, there are compromises that can be made to maintain state oversight through either making a police force through a special district with the Baltimore City Police Department, or in partnership with one of our other state institutions of higher education here in the city, and giving the opportunity for Hopkins to have policing on their campus through those entities. But the bill, as it's written, would actually create a completely separate and independent police department without oversight or accountability, rather, to the state of Maryland. And another component that's written into the bill is the state can take away powers of policing only after there has been essentially gross abuse that would have happened and a hearing that would be had. So there is opportunity to take that away, but only in really extra special circumstances. So I think a lot of people's concerns are how do we give away public good to a private institution without having that proper oversight? But as I mentioned, there are some compromises that can be made, and folks are working on those.
I think another issue too, caller, is that you may be opening up Pandora's box. You know what I mean? Like, where does it stop at as far as private institutions being able to have their own law enforcement? Do we, allow every particular institute that complains that they need to have a police force that's privatized to actually have a full ranking police department, that could really open up a lot of issues with private institutions being kind of given that authority to start their own police force. So where does it stop at that point?
Yeah, another component go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, it's like, okay, it's not like the John Hopkins to make up his own laws and regulations to go by. They still got to go by the law. You still got to, when you arrest somebody, give them Miranda rights. I mean, you still have to go by the same law that universities safety have to have and everything. So I don't understand. You think they're gonna get their own police force and go knock on people's doors and bring them out in the street and shoot? I mean, I don't get it. I mean, you got university to have it, and John Hopkins want it, but you just don't want more armed professionals on the streets, or what?
Well, no, I think what they're saying is, University of Maryland, Coppin, Morgan, they are accountable as public institutions to the state. As a private institution,
correct,
you're actually not accountable to anybody. There's no real oversight there. And so when you're dealing with people who are now handling life and death situations with armed, handguns, that's a whole different situation than going around writing somebody a citation, right? And so I understand what you're saying, because I'm torn on this issue myself. It's like, why wouldn't you want more enforcement, especially how crazy it's been on the streets of Baltimore? But in the same sense is, we have that oversight when it comes to law enforcement, whether it be Baltimore City Police, whether it be school police, whether it be institutions like Morgan and Coppin and University. But you don't have that same oversight when it comes to a private institution like Hopkins, or the possibility of a downtown partnership or something like that. This kind of opens, like Jason said, a Pandora's box. And so I think that's what they're kind of arguing.
And Hassan, the other question, caller, the other question would be, Hassan, isn't John Hopkins having their own particular Bill of Rights or their own particular language, or are they going to have to follow the Bill of Rights of what's currently as far as the police oversight is concerned? Because again, you're talking about they're having their own board and. Well,
they'll definitely have an accountability board now,
but that's their own accountability board. That's not the state civilian oversight committee,
right?
But they would still have, those officers would still be afforded the rights of the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, and would follow those particular regulations and laws to protect them, and follow the investigations that are set out within that bill. The other point I would make, Mr. Scott, is, if you want to, so there's examples out there across the country of private institutions who have police departments, and one example is the University of Chicago, and it's a predominantly white institution, similarly to Hopkins, and the numbers are astronomically, the numbers of arrests and stops of people of color at that institution does not represent the people who go to that institution. So I think that's another major concern, is who is being policed by the Hopkins, or by any institution having a police force. And that's something that we should be looking at and asking around other institutional police departments. And it gives us an opportunity to have that conversation about what's happening at the University of Maryland, Baltimore's police department, or how's the Morgan Police Department doing, and thinking about, what type of oversight do we have with those other departments, and what can we write in to have more civilian insight. But the major concern is, if something bad, or if something happens, if a mishap comes to be, if a life is lost, who is that family go to get justice? And at this point in time, it's not the state of Maryland. It would be Hopkins, and who at Hopkins is then responsible? Is it the Board of Trustees? Is it the president? Those are the types of questions that just, aren't clear, because it's not a state institution.
Yeah, but even though, if it's not a state institution, if a John Hopkins officer, wrongfully shoots somebody, he would still have to be accountable to Maryland law.
I don't follow you in terms of what, though? I mean,
if an officer from John Hopkins accidentally shoot an individual walking down the street,
right?
Okay, that officer is still subject to Maryland law. It doesn't matter if he worked for John Hopkins. If he used his firearm illegally, he's still subject to Maryland law.
Yeah, but he's not subject to the same laws that you and I would be, right? They're protected.
Why not?
No, they're protected under the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights now, right? And who's to say that this officer who has unfairly targeted an individual who may not have done anything at all, now you're kind of arming civilians who may not have went through that same training as the academy. They shoot somebody, they're not in terms of, especially financially. That's the real question is if they unlawfully kill me, will you as my family member be able to recruit? See, we know who you go after if the police do it. We know who you can go after financially. And
John Hopkins got to be responsible for that.
Well, that's the question. Will they be responsible and accountable?
Correct. And will their language in their laws or their bylaws make them exempt from constitutional violations, that it won't necessarily hit the institution, or the institution won't be necessarily responsible for constitutional right violations? And
we saw what they tried to do with the Henrietta Lacks stuff. I mean, they don't. Johns Hopkins ain't somebody who typically kicks out money, right? Even when they know they did wrong in a situation like that one, they still have ran from it and tried not paying out. So I can only imagine what's going to happen when they're going to be held responsible for one of their officers mistakenly beating or unfortunately murdering somebody on the streets of Baltimore. Then it's an entire, then we're going to stand. So that is one issue that I've heard raised that I have a big issue with.
And again, when I think of private police forces, unfortunately, I have to think of the extreme examples of this, like, for instance, the Mormon Church, and how they were allowed to keep their particular privatized police department. And they were guilty of all kinds of atrocities and cover-ups within the Mormon community. You know what I mean? They actually protected the Mormon community. This could be a case where law enforcement officers that are under John Hopkins are going to protect the interest of John Hopkins.
And that's something that you see across the board for campus police departments, is what interests are they protecting and how are they reporting various crimes or assaults that take place on campus. And that wouldn't be, there's national research that's been done on that and lots of publications that have highlighted the wrongs of campus police to protect the reputation of the institution. And so I think that's a very valid concern, and affording more rights to an organization to protect or cover up an investigation, it should be something that we're all concerned about. Not saying that Hopkins will be doing that, but it has happened in the past.
But actually, we've have seen that recently. I mean, there has been some attacks on campus that have really been kind of kept, internal, and haven't necessarily been identified to the public. And so they really have some internal issues going on, especially with sexual assaults on campus. Is there anything else there, caller?
Yeah, I mean, we have MTA. MTA has the same powers as Baltimore PD, except for you can't call 911 to get a transit cop or whatever case it may be. But the whole point is just here. It doesn't matter. I mean, they're still under the same stipulation as police officers.
You're still talking about a state agency. MTA is a state agency.
Well, but the whole point, you're still gonna have to follow the guidelines of police officers, no matter what, if they private or whatever case it be. All you gotta do is this: they cannot go off of the campus and do get off the campus and do anything because of the fact their jurisdiction is only included to their campus, isn't it?
Well, that's actually not true, because that's right now. That's one of the questions is, where do those boundaries stop?
Correct.
And one of the senators, Corey McCray, actually raised this issue is there's nowhere in the legislation that says your boundaries only are from this to this that surround Johns Hopkins. Right. So if a campus cop is a campus cop, where does it stop? Where are their boundaries? And that's not actually spelled out in the legislation.
Right. And it would only be spelled out through the MO.
You gotta have some kind of limits. You just can't. I mean, even Baltimore PD can't go in the county and do anything. So
but we've seen these violations even with Morgan State. I mean, look what happened with Tyrone West. Tyrone West was Morgan State University police were there. They were at the location, and that was actually outside the boundaries of the campus. Mm-hmm. But they were assisting and helping Baltimore City Police in response to a stop.
Yeah, the boundaries would be set through the memorandum of understanding process and the Baltimore City Police Commissioner, and that through that process they would identify what those boundaries would be. However, in the legislation, it does say that the officers would have policing powers in transit from one campus to another, and it would cover all of the properties owned or leased by Johns Hopkins. So if you make a web of the properties owned and leased by Johns Hopkins, that would afford these individuals the rights to police those properties. We're looking at the entire city of Baltimore, potentially for these individuals to be traveling from one point to another. Now, I recognize that the plan of Hopkins is not to have officers necessarily in transit between campuses. They would have departments that would set up on the East Baltimore campus, the Homewood campus, and the Peabody campus. But it's written into the law that way. And it's also stated in the legislation that the mayor of Baltimore City, the governor of the state of Maryland, and the police commissioner could request to expand those boundaries at any time to assist with other policing efforts happening in the city. So should something be going on and staffing shortage maybe, something that we're experiencing now, and they want some additional help in the Eastern District, the mayor could request that service and afford the right of those officers to police greater areas than what was agreed upon in the MOU. So to say that it would only be campus, I think, is incredibly unrealistic. It would definitely be areas surrounding campus that these individuals would have authority over. And that's another thing that communities both in East Baltimore here and around the Homewood campus are concerned about. I know that Able community and the Remington community have both voted in opposition of this legislation because of those reasons.
And Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, because you see John Hopkins expanding out beyond the university, and now you have housing and campuses expanding outside of the university. They could basically say their boundary includes these properties as well.
I mean, if it's owned and operated, if it's owned or leased by Hopkins, according to the legislation, they would have authority to police those areas.
Let's say it houses students or houses folks that work on the campus. Because you see a lot more outside housing, you know what I mean? Like, especially in the east side, you see a lot of area that's not really part of John Hopkins, but there's students, there's doctors, there's people that work for the institution that are now moving into those areas.
Yeah. And I think those communities could request, and then it would even create that divide again of who is being policed and why are those police present in those communities.
Correct. Anything else, Colin?
One more question. Really, I just want to know. Right. Why is John Hopkins a nonprofit organization?
I mean, it's a private institution that isn't governmental, and I mean, I don't know. It's a historical question of Mr. Hopkins set up the trust many years ago, right before he passed away, to establish an institution of learning and of medicine, to not benefit self-interest, but to benefit the public good. And so I think that's, I'm sure there's a lot more technical and legal ways that you could discuss that question.
And that's why they get away with paying $1 leases and stuff like that.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, come on. I mean,
right, so if anything, they could afford.
Own too much to be a nonprofit organization.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And if anything, they could afford their own police department, so that we wouldn't have to pay $10 million out of our tax, coffers for them.
No, they can definitely afford.
Thank you very much. I'm good.
Thanks, Keith. We got our union bosses of all bosses on the line. Mark.
Hey.
Wellity. No.
Wellity. I'm sitting here screaming into the phone. I can't understand how you're not able to recognize the difference between a private police force and a public police force. If I get my head bashed in by a city police officer, then my recourse is much different than if I get my head bashed in by a private Hopkins police officer. If you think it's just as easy to sue Johns Hopkins as it is to sue Baltimore City, you need to go back to law school. I mean, it's a whole different look. There are ways to pressure public institutions that there aren't ways to pressure private institutions. For instance, Kelly Davis and the rest of them, they can have protests down City Hall that get attention, that the city council gets involved, and the mayor gets involved, and there are ways to bring pressure on government to redress a grievance that you can't do at Hopkins. They'll throw your black ass off campus. You can't have a rally down there. You can't have they're not accountable in the same way. And to pretend that they are or that you don't understand the difference is just crazy to me. I mean, it's Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Hospital. If you think about it, I mean, at least the university, you can imagine what the boundaries of that campus are. But I defy you to define for me the Johns Hopkins Hospital campus. I mean, it's half of East Baltimore.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's carry out, then there's the Popeyes, and then there's not a campus with a fence around it for Johns Hopkins Hospital. And if you give them this right, you are giving East Baltimore to Johns Hopkins.
Right.
You're just giving it to them. You know, to act like, you know, oh, well, they're only going to be concerned with these, you know, 6 blocks. What I would suggest is that if Hopkins is looking to police something, police the record number of sexual assaults on their own campus by their own students. When they get that problem together, then come back.
I'm surprised this is the first time I really agree with Mark. Like, this is the first.
But that's a good question. Even what you brought up, Jason, because I know for a fact, because I used to deal with one that went there years and years ago.
Deal with what?
Their housing stretches, some of it stretches all the way past Giant over there on 33rd in Greenmount, right?
Yeah, they own the Eastern building, the old Eastern High School.
Right. So they got housing that goes way over there. Now, you know, the university is blocks and blocks and blocks. So that means now that's a good portion of East Baltimore right in that part.
Correct.
We ain't even talking about the university yet, right? Or the Peabody, none of that. And so that's what they say. It stretches 3 legislative districts alone. So, you know, you do kind of give away a lot of part of the city. And my question is this. I ain't even going to get into it right now.
Here's
here's the other question that I have is, if there are all these programs that are such a good idea for the state to fund, and the state has all this change sitting around in the sofa cushions to fund it, then why don't they just do that anyway? Why do they have to do that in conjunction with a private police force? I mean, I was tempted to at least be interested in the Hopkins proposal when I thought they were bringing a whole lot of money to the table. But they're offering to create their own police force and have us pay for ancillary programs around it. If the ancillary programs are a good idea, we should fund them anyway, above, aside, and apart from any Hopkins police force. This is the same thing that they did with the mandatory minimums bill last year. When they didn't have the votes to pass Hogan's mandatory minimums, they started adding in all this money sweeteners for crime prevention programs. Well, if you've got money for crime prevention programs, then you should put them through the legislature and spend that money through the regular order process. Why do they have to be attached to mandatory minimums, which many people oppose? This is just a shell game. And if Hopkins was dealing with folks honestly, they would deal with it in a different way.
Absolutely. Well, if our legislators were dealing with it honestly, they can say what they want about, I'm on the fence, I don't know. You don't introduce a bill like this and combine these type of services and now do with the tricky stuff. I don't know if you heard that, Mark, but they switched the hearing date from, and you're in Annapolis quite a bit, so you know what this means. They switched, it was going to, and you may have seen, I've never seen this in my life, but the Senate was scheduled for next Friday at 12. The House was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 1. They put the House on the same exact day as the Senate bill hearing, 30 minutes apart. So 12,
that's extreme. That's extremely it's not unheard of, but it is extremely unusual.
I've never heard of
that. Is to do them both on the same day and it be a Friday.
Exactly.
That's the other game that they're playing here. Is because they're counting on the fact anyone that goes to Annapolis knows that Fridays are a ghost town in Annapolis. There's nothing that happens there after 11 a.m. Once they get out of session, they're gone until Monday night. Nobody's around. It's a ghost town. The staff ain't there. Committees aren't holding hearings. So the fact that they have set up these days on a Friday when probably that bill is the only bill on the respective committee's agendas, or maybe they have one other, but it's not a full committee hearing day. So what they're doing is, like, sometimes they'll hear the same bill on the same day, but the chairman of the respective committees coordinate it so that one goes first and the other goes later, and it's a big day and it spans out. But if you have two committees meeting within a half an hour of each other, both of whom the only agenda item, or one of the only agenda items, is this bill, that is absolutely a way to split the opposition and to confuse folks about how they can go and be heard. And you know who should get the pressure on this?
Did I just tell you that?
Is Luke.
Are
you there?
Yeah. No, I was just telling them that.
And the one who should get the pressure on this, quite frankly, is Luke Clippinger. He is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and he is the only chair or vice chair of either committee that is from Baltimore City. People should be flooding Luke Clippinger's office with questions about why the hearings are being held at the same time. People want to come to Annapolis. People want to be heard on this. There are folks that live in those neighborhoods, which Luke does not. There are folks that live in these neighborhoods that will be impacted by these changes that ought to have the opportunity to be heard in both chambers on this vital issue. And they are making that exceedingly difficult, and purposefully so, and it's shameful.
And I'm going to tell you something. When the bill was first introduced, I went to both of the bills on the website, and the House version was on the 26th at 1 o'clock. I said, okay, that makes sense. One's on Friday, one's on a Tuesday. Okay. And then now a legislator emailed me earlier today and said, oh, no, son, both of them are on the same day now, on Friday. And when I went to it now, it changed. One's at 12:30, one's at 1 o'clock. And I was just telling them, how do you bring down busloads of people? They can't testify in one house when they're back-to-back like that. Now you got to split up your opposition in one chamber and have the other half go to the other chamber. And, on a Friday, too? Come on, man. No. These people are playing a lot of games with this bill, which shows you any member of the public should realize if they got to do all of this to try to get this bill passed, that means it's shenanigans going on. That means it's not in the best interest of the people. Point blank, period. Whether you're for or against this bill, this is not how you pass good legislation. It just isn't.
Well, they know they're in trouble because they need a majority of both delegations in Baltimore City. And in Baltimore City, Corey has been making some very encouraging noises about being against. He wants some pretty substantive amendments, which usually means that at the end of the day, if he doesn't get those amendments, he's going to be against the bill. If Corey is against the bill, they don't have the votes to pass.
And guess what? Now the Senate has a full slate of bills, right, on that Friday. Okay. The House, this is the only damn bill that they're hearing. Yeah. So it showed you they moved it over. They didn't even have anything scheduled. This is the only bill that they got.
They weren't planning to meet at all.
At all.
Planning to meet.
Because they don't meet on Fridays.
This is a convenience to Hopkins because Hopkins doesn't want to have their president have to travel all the way to Annapolis twice.
Right.
This is all about this is crazy. And quite frankly, we ought to, the Baltimore Sun or the Baltimore Brew or DMV Daily or somebody needs to be on the phone to Luke Clippinger to ask him how this happened. He is the chair of that committee. He has discretion over scheduling. He ought to answer to his constituents about why he's making it purposefully difficult.
And check this out. There's never been thus far, and there isn't beyond this, any House Judiciary Committee hearing at 11:30 on a Friday. None. It don't even happen before this. And then the only time they start really getting is in March and April when it really gets packed.
Yeah, right. For them to even be having Friday hearings, I mean, ECM did it for the Fight for 15 because they wanted to get it out of the way. But anyone that is a student of Annapolis, like you are, Hassan, like I am, knows that in mid to early February, there ain't nothing happening in Annapolis on a Friday.
Not to mention
delegation meetings in the morning, and they go into session for 20 minutes, and they get the heck out of there. They're home in their respective jurisdictions by lunch.
And check this out, though. House hearings are at what time?
1 o'clock.
This bill hearing just happens to be for 11:30. Why is it not 1
The
o'clock?
other thing.
Come on,
Yeah.
man. They playing games. 12 o'clock
They're
because the Senate.
absolutely playing games.
Come on, man. See, now if you had it at
Luke
1.
ought to answer why. Luca, I mean, I wish someone that has the relation, like we can, or somebody in the media needs to call the chairman, the new chairman that we were all so excited to have because we had a Baltimore City chairman. Someone needs to call the chairman and ask him why he scheduled it in this way. Something that is so important and vital to Baltimore City, the jurisdiction from which he's from. Because, look, JPR and Judiciary, he's Baltimore City's only leadership representative. The vice chair
Vanessa
of
Atterbury.
Judiciary is Will Smith from Montgomery County. You got Bobby Zirkin from Baltimore County, no friend of Baltimore City. At JPR and Judiciary, you've got Lou Clippinger, that's the chair. Vanessa Atterbury from Howard County is the vice chair. Baltimore City's got one bite at the apple when it comes to the governance of these respective criminal justice committees in Annapolis, and Luke is it. So Luke ought to have to answer as to why he's agreeing to do this.
Mark, stay on the line with us. We have one caller. Don't
Matter of
hang
fact,
up.
you know what we're going to do? Next week on Monday, we're going to have, I'm going to tell you what a Tell the Truth Tuesday is going to be. We're going to call up to Annapolis from live from the show and have and get the delegate on the phone as if we're just calling, and we're going to do it live so everybody can hear this conversation about why the hell he's playing the
We got a town hall on Monday.
Well, we're going to do it Tuesday. We do it tomorrow, goddammit.
Yeah.
We should ask our dear friend of the show, Bill Ferguson, who has a very close relationship with his delegate, if he could please make his delegate available for a 5-minute interview next week.
And Mr. Kurt Anderson, I'm sure, he's on the committee. He's so much in favor of it. I'm sure Kurt was part to whisper in his ear, boy, we should have this on a, he tried that with the city delegation last session when we blew him up, when he was trying to hand over the reins of power to Cheryl Glenn under the cover of law.
Yeah.
Come on now. You got a caller on the line?
Yeah, caller, you on the line?
Yes. This is Bobby. How you doing?
Hey, what's up, Bobby?
Hey, Bobby.
What's going on? So I just hopped on the past 10 minutes, but I wanted to weigh in on just one, observation or how I feel about this situation. So I think that, I live in District 46, and I actually called Lou Clippinger and asked him, what his position was and what would be the process for community input. And I called him a week ago, and I haven't heard anything back. So I'm just once again going to reiterate what Mark said is he needs to be clear with his constituents about the process for community involvement. The other thing is I think this situation is, at least in District 46, it reemphasizes the dynamic that we see with these slates. So here you have Mike Miller, who says this Hopkins private police force is a legislative priority for him.
Yep.
We know that historically Bill Ferguson follows what Mike Miller does. In Team 46, they don't really have independence from one another on how they vote. They typically vote as a block. And so I actually believe, and people might say this is speculation, I think Robin Lewis is actually probably the most progressive member of that delegation. And
No
I think
question
she
about
actually
it.
is against. Yeah, I think she's actually against it. But it will be interesting to see if she's willing to break from the slate, because and the reality is Bill Ferguson is probably going to vote in favor of this. Lou Clipping, and Robin Lewis knows the power of being on that slate. So is this one?
But this is why. I mean, if you look at I don't want to pick on Robin because I like her, but Robin is uniquely indebted to them because they didn't put her on the slate. This what shows why the Central Committee process is so bankrupt. When Pete Hannon left to take the job with the city, Bill Ferguson had his allies on the Central Committee put her as a delegate, and then they ran with her. So in some ways, she's like, she's torn because she's against, I know in my heart she was against that mandatory minimum stuff last session. But in some ways, she's like, I got to dance with the girl who brung me. You know what I mean? They put me
Right.
here. They're the reason why I'm a delegate, because if that Central Committee was left to its own devices, Dea Thomas would be the delegate, not Robin Lewis. Bill Ferguson
Right.
had his people on the Central Committee install Robin Lewis, which was not
Right.
a bad thing. Robin's great, but let's be clear who she owes her seat to. It's not us. It's Bill.
Yeah.
So when
And
Bill, Luke, and Brooke make the call, she answers. I mean, she'd be
And what
dumb
I'll
not
say
to,
is-
but on an issue like this, sometimes you have to break away to show your own independence.
No, exactly, Mark, and that's what I'm really trying to say is, like, she said it broke her heart not to vote for the mandatory minimums.
Mm-hmm.
If she supports this and says it breaks her heart, I'm just going to be real. It's not good enough.
Right.
Sure that Bill Ferguson put you on that seat, but at some point you have to be willing to demonstrate independence and hope that the progressive base of your constituency backs you.
Yep.
And, it's frustrating because, at least as a District 46 resident, Bill Ferguson takes orders from Mike Miller, and all the delegates follow his lead. They have no independence from one another. But yeah, it will be also interesting, and I think, I don't know if you talked about this previously, but in the Sun article that was released last Friday, I believe, he said he was weighing if he could actually vote on it, Bill Ferguson, given that he was a Hopkins employee.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see if it's decided, or if he feels compelled to recuse himself, given his institutional relationship to Hopkins.
Oh, I didn't. Does he work? I don't think I knew that, or I didn't remember that. I guess.
Yeah, he
does work for Hopkins.
I work at Hopkins School of Education, and he is the director of urban education reform at Johns Hopkins University. Yes.
Oh, wow.
And he did weigh in, like he said on the article, saying, "Well, I got to get an ethics, ruling first to see where." But I guarantee this: if they find out the Corey's against it, Jill's probably against it. We know Mary's
Jill's
against it.
definitely against it.
Then you're going to have to now step up. I mean, at that point, if those three are against it, it's dead, right? Even if he steps up, there's only 6 members.
No, because if they've got Shirley, Antonio, and Bill,
That's
on
3
the
to
other
3.
side, well, then it would be 3 to 3.
Yeah, so it's dead.
It would fail. It would fail. You're right. Yeah, they need 4. They need 4. But I'll tell you what. This is what's interesting to watch. If they need Bill to be number 4,
Oh, he
I
will
think you'll
be.
find that the ethics committee grants him the dispensation to vote.
Real
Okay?
quick. But I want to see that ethics committee statement, and I want to see the attorney general's opinion. Period. Bottom line. Don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. I want to see it.
This is the thing, and this is what people don't always recognize, is that recusal in almost all matters, including with a judge, you really are you're the judge of your own recusal. Like, the attorney general wouldn't really give an opinion on whether he should recuse himself. That's something that's supposed to be left up to the person, and so.
But a legislator can request an attorney general opinion, though, because I know Frank Conway used to do it all the time.
But I don't think there's a law that spells out exactly what merits recusal other than the appearance of, and we can disagree on what appearance of means.
Right.
If there's the appearance of impropriety, if you vote on it, then you shouldn't vote on it. But we would have to agree on what appearance of impropriety means. That's what I mean. I mean, we can ask for an opinion from the Attorney General, but I think the Attorney General would come back to the normal standard, which is, it's kind of like what Justice Potter Stewart said about pornography. I know it when I see it. A conflict, I know a conflict when I see it. So you could argue that, well, he's not going to benefit from this financially, so even though he, it's not a very clear decision. But the fact that he told the Baltimore Sun that he's in doubt about whether he should or not should weigh against him voting on it.
I mean, I think
if you're not sure, you should err on the side of recusal, not recusal.
And I think another important component is the only reason we have this conversation is if they should recuse themselves or not is because we're talking about a private institution. And
Absolutely.
There are not only Senator Ferguson, there are others who are staffed by Johns Hopkins who are in the General Assembly would that mean that those individuals would also need to recuse themselves? And would it extend to the spouses or other folks in those families that have connections to or are receiving financial benefits from the institution that should recuse themselves? So, I mean, there's no disclosure in the bill that says, who's connected to Hopkins and how would that affect their voting behavior. I do believe that there's at least one delegate who's already announced that they would recuse themselves from this particular legislation because they work at Hopkins. But I mean, where does it?
Which one is that, Shane?
Tony Bridges.
Oh, okay.
But I think, that it brings up a point. It's a private institution. We're having the conversation because it's the largest employer in the city of Baltimore, the second largest employer in the state of Maryland, if not the second or third. So, it has influence across this state, and there's lots of folks who have benefited financially through either jobs or contracts with the institution. So,
Bobby,
I guess, all I was going to say was, if this issue, once again, for me, as a District 46 resident, highlights that this slate has to be broken up. I mean, we need, I'm sick and tired of Mike Miller basically giving his legislative priorities, Senator Ferguson following it, and then the rest of the delegates following him. And even though there may be progressive members on that delegation, it just once again highlights I'm frustrated with the lack of independence from one another, even though some of them claim to be progressive. So that's all I had to add today. But yeah.
Thanks, Bobby.
I really appreciate the
thank
call,
you, sir.
Yeah.
See, now it's really coming to light now. See, we ain't know all this before the DMV Daily Show.
All right.
We unraveling it all. So y'all playing politics over there down in Annapolis with this bill.
And just to reiterate, one of Hopkins' three options when they released the report was to work with either the state or the city to create a special district that would still allow for them to have policing powers on campus, but be still accountable to either the city or the state. And while I personally am opposed to that, adding guns in officers on campus, that is something that would be a compromise. And, as we always talk about compromise, with a good compromise, no one's going to be, 100% happy. And so I think that there's opportunity through the legislative process to either amend the bill or next session to bring it up again and look at what it would mean to have a state or city partnership with the institution. Is something that we can continue to consider. So it doesn't mean, a lot of folks out there just like you hate Hopkins or, you're anti-Hopkins, so you don't want them to ever have opportunities like this. I don't think that's the case. I think there are opportunities for compromise, even acknowledged by the institution, that we should be considering before we dole out any type of public goods to private institutions.
And you can tell the deep divide in this, even in the 43rd, right? You got the state senator who's vehemently against it, but then you have Delegate Maggie McIntosh. Well, Kurt Anderson's vehemently for it. Maggie is kind of for it, but she's like, well, I'm going to wait to see what my citizens say. And then you got Ann Perkins, who was the former delegate from Tuscany.
Maggie's smart enough to pretend at least that she has her finger to the wind, but Maggie's going to be in favor of this.
Yeah, she's all day
and
long.
I think this is the thing, and this is the important thing to remember, is that elections have consequences, okay? If this were last year's Senate, this would be done.
Yeah, without question. It'll flew through the Senate.
Right. And right now in the House, the way I count it, we've got 4 opposed, 9 in favor, and 1 who's abstaining, who's Bridges. And so, we'd be very unlikely to stop it in the House. If we're going to stop it, it's going to be in the Senate. And if we stop it in the Senate, it's going to be as the direct result of the changes in 40, 43, 45. Yeah, 40, 43, and 45. Like, those are three areas that and 41.
And 41.
Yeah,
41.
Nat would have voted for it in a minute. So, 40, 41, 43, and 45.
All you have to do is give him a lollipop.
It's because, they would have cut him a check and he would have been for it. So, yeah.
Someone asked online if Loyola has a police department. So the state does have in code that allows for institutions to have policing units on campuses. Hopkins has one currently. They even call the individuals who work there as police officers and lieutenants. Similarly with Loyola, those individuals don't have authorization to carry firearms. They can have tasers and they can have other equipment, but they are not allowed to have firearms and are not primarily responsible for any investigative work that the police department could possibly take on. So they can assist with, they can be a part of an investigation, but they can't be a lead. So yeah, Loyola has that, Hopkins has that. I'm pretty sure Micah does as well. But it limits their powers and authority. So that currently is out there, and I think that's also created some confusion with we see that Loyola has a police department, they have cars, they are looking, hiring police officers, but it's not the same as they don't have the same full rights or go through the same training, frankly, as what a police officer would go through. So that's a good question, but there's still a distinct difference between the two.
So they're mace mobile officers, basically. Riding around with their mace in again. What's the police officers from Friday?
Top flight.
Top flight. That's what they are. Top flight security. But yeah, I mean, look, you got the Able Improvement Association. They're vehemently against. They voted 43 against this. But then you go across to Tuscany, and they're in favor of it. So
look at the people who live in Able and who live in Tuscany.
Exactly. Big difference.
Yeah, they're very different. And not for nothing, that's Maggie's Community Association.
But I mean, I think you would find this across some of these neighborhoods in the 43rd.
Absolutely.
Right? Some of them more affluent, others that aren't. They're going to be a different take on it, and it's mostly because it doesn't have anything to do with Hopkins as opposed to the mindset of those in opposed or for
a class
officers.
issue. They don't people in a certain socioeconomic demographic view the presence of police far differently than people who are subject to their authority in the same ways. You know what I mean? Like somebody in Canterbury, it's pretty unlikely, unless they're really like super woke, it's pretty unlikely to be worried about the presence of police in any context, because their whole frame of reference for policing is officer friendly that talks to my kids and helps old ladies across the street. Mm-hmm. It's folks that are of a lower socioeconomic demographic that maybe have had bad experiences with law enforcement or have kids that they're afraid of having bad experiences with law enforcement that view this whole context differently. I'm not surprised Canterbury says come on in, because they'd be happy to have police, one police person a street, patrol their neighborhood. They'd have no issue with it because they don't have it's never been a problem for them. It's a completely different context, and that's what people don't always understand. Yeah. Like the people that are worried about the police being around too much, it's not because they hate police. Most of us have police that are part of our families. It's a matter of being nervous about the extent to which more police equals more abuse from average everyday citizens. That's what it's about. It's not about not liking police.
Right, and the police aren't going to, more than likely, wouldn't be even going into Tuscany, Canterbury. I don't see the point of why the Hopkins police would be going up there.
They did something.
Right, but I think with Remington, at least the Greater Remington Improvement Association, with them opposing it, that organization had many, many long conversations about what this would mean for their particular community, with lots of Hopkins, both staff and students and faculty living there, but also with a community that's really going through a gentrification process right now. And they had many conversations, just like Able and all the other communities that surround Hopkins. We've been talking about this for a year now, and it's not like we're just coming to our conclusions just at the whim. We've had some really, really hard conversations about what it means and what we could lose out on by opposing something like this. But at the end of the day, we all want solutions, be it either Tuscany, Canterbury, Able, my community, or Remington. We are looking for ways to create strong, resilient communities that are safe for everyone. And we do that through building up positive relationships with the police department. If you throw another police department in the mix, that creates even more work for that community to build equitable relationships. So, my biggest thing, something that I'll continue to advocate for and work with our partners in the police department, is to create true partnerships and relationships with the police and the officers who are policing our community, to make sure that they feel and know that they're a part of our community, but they also know the people who live there and are going to be looking out for each other. So when you throw another police department into the mix, it creates more confusion. We're not working together. We're not collaborating. We're not truly addressing the safety of our communities. And that should be a concern, especially to our legislators who we voted for and elected and are accountable to us. So I think that we got to be more mindful of what adding another police department into the mix is, how it affects community, and how it can make the process even more cumbersome.
Yeah, well, and also, do the police hire answer to the citizens or to the Hopkins board? And that's the question. That's what we were talking about earlier. Their accountability, the accountability board that they're supposed to create this legislation that is appointed solely by Hopkins, with only 2 appointees from the city, one from the mayor, one from the council president. And then another question that comes into it is the local hiring thing, right? And I know Senator McRae brought this up as well in our conversation, was, okay, well, if this is happening, then will there be a local hiring mandate put into this legislation, and will they be hiring?
And would the good officers that Hopkins want to hire come from the good officers that we have in the Baltimore City Police Department, even creating a greater drain on some of the resources that we see with our own department? I mean, these are the types of things we have to be considering, especially when we can't hire officers at the rate that we're trying to right now. Where are the officers coming from? Who are we hiring? And why wouldn't they be officers that the city would be trying to hire as well?
Especially if it's a cushy job versus,
it's going to be a lot easier.
You're right, a lot easier, right, than patrolling Baker Street and...
Hassan, I know we're about to go, but the Baltimore Sun just broke a story on the wire that says that the Senate Republicans have introduced a bill to require guns on the part of school officers. So the Cheryl Glenn bill, which she withdrew because the Board of Ed voted against it, now the Republicans have taken it up as a call to arms after Frederick Douglass.
Right, no, but they had this bill in. They're just reporting on it now, but that bill was in. I reported on that last week on the Annapolis report. But that's a statewide bill that allowed. They were doing it because of Grove Park, what happened in Groveland, right here in Maryland, just last year.
Okay.
So
well,
what they want
reported
is
it like he just introduced it.
No, and that's legislation to be able to have in all buildings. All right, y'all. Well, gotta go. Another great show as always. But remember, new promise begins with a new day. Therefore, the promise of tomorrow is greater than that of yesterday. Tune in about 15, 20 minutes. We'll be live Black Wall Street Awards right here from DMV Daily Media.
Free Keith Davis.